Hello viewers, for warm welcome to the first knowledge share of Fuzzy Scientist. As I told you, right, I'd be sharing different videos on various topics of my interest. So be it from my own education background like physics, chemistry, biology, or all the different learnings around my life. So I know, so you might find it very hard in understanding my language here and there. So that is because this is my first attempt. So I'm doing this all these videos as part of my internal journey. So I just want to test myself, like how deep I'm interested to teach others or to share my knowledge in a proper format. So hope you bear with me for all my errors which you might be experiencing in the future or now. So thanks again. So okay, the topic today I've taken is carbohydrates. So what are carbohydrates? Carbs, most commonly used word in the entire fitness industry, right? You might have heard these words. If your friend who's very frequently going to gym, you might have heard these words carbs from him. So what are actually these carbohydrates? So to put simply, carbohydrates are nothing but hydrates of carbons. So they are generally made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. So my essence in telling these are the hydrates of carbon, you find if a basic empirical formula of carbohydrates is CH2O whole bracket N. So you find water molecule in these water molecules getting interacted in a formulatic way with carbon atoms. So these makes carbohydrates. Of course there are many exceptional true carbohydrates which do not fit into this general empirical format also. Yet again there are other organic molecules which are not at all related to carbohydrates but do exhibit this empirical formula of CH2O whole bracket N. So what is a proper definition of carbohydrates then? So well, if someone asks me how do you define carbohydrates, so the major text definitions goes like this: carbohydrates may be defined as polyhydroxyaldehydes or say polyhydroxyketones or compounds that generate them when undergone hydrolysis. That means if you take an organic molecule and if it is hydrolyzed into minor molecules and they generate polyhydroxyaldehydes or polyhydroxyketones, then these compounds can be called as carbohydrates. So this is a basic textual definition you find there. So for us, or for many of us, like to our knowledge, carbohydrates are nothing but starch products. In different languages they are called as differently. So you to put it very simply, we can call as they are the parents of sugars that enter into our body. You can call them, they're the carbohydrates sometimes can be called as complex sugars. So why do we need carbohydrates basically? So see, our human body is made of different molecules put together. So the major constituents of these molecules are obviously carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. So carbohydrates, the major important thing in carbohydrates is that they are the very essential sources of energy for us. See, our body can take energy from carbohydrates, of fats, of amino acids, or proteins, or directly from them proteins itself. But our the initial source from which the body derives energy is carbohydrates. So it is very essential. So majority of food items, you take what, you might be a vegan or you might be a vegetarian, you might be a non-vegetarian, majority of your food contains carbohydrates as a major nutritional constituent in them. So okay, so how what are the so uh, so the next important question is like how do we digest carbohydrates? So we consume carbohydrates in different manners, right? So we find carbohydrates in rice, we find carbohydrates in fruits, we find carbohydrates in wheat, we find carbohydrates everywhere. So how do we digest these all items? I mean, okay, on a broad view we understand that food is digested in our body. So but when you microscopically view, each constituent is digested differently in our body. So how does these carbohydrates gets digested in our body? So to put it simple, see, the digestion of carbohydrate begins from the first stage of your the first stage of your food consumption, which is nothing but chewing. So that mean I mean what I want to say is that the digestion of carbohydrates begins at the mouth itself. From the mouth itself, we have an enzyme called amylase, or sometimes it is also called as ptyalin, which is present in our saliva. So the basic the food, if you are a rice eating person, the minute you start chewing your rice, the it begins the digestion there begins the digestion of carbohydrates. So all these carbohydrates are, simply put, a complex polysaccharides. These complex polysaccharides are broken down into disaccharides or monosaccharides and so on, starting from the mouth itself. So uh, as we chew the food and it enters into stomach, slowly different enzymes acts on our food, and that slowly enters into our small intestine. So in small intestine, the major enzymes that act on our food to digest these carbohydrates are the amylase secreted by pancreas. It is called pancreatic amylase. So this pancreatic amylase majorly acts on the complex carbohydrates, and it breaks down into minute monosaccharide constituents, which are later, uh, when they start going down in the small intestine system. So we have other set of class of enzymes called brush border enzymes. There, a special enzyme called alpha dextrin does a removal activity of glucose, one at a time, glucose molecule one at a time, from these dextrin molecules, which are basically derived from breakdown of these complex carbohydrates, uh, after the activity of amylase, pancreatic amylase. So this is how basically the carbohydrates are digested, and each glucose molecule is one glucose molecule at a time will be removed from the dextrin molecules with the action of alpha dextrinase enzyme, which is a brush border class of enzyme. So each these glucose molecules and are absorbed, very easily absorbed into our blood. See, whatever food you consume, the final form of, for example, see, if you're consuming carbohydrates, the final form of it is glucose. So it is directly absorbed into our blood. Glucose has a capacity to directly enter into our blood from any layer, crossing any barrier, or crossing any cell membrane. So that's how we actually take glucose. So that is why you would have heard this in many instances, that sprint runners or marathon runners do carry, or any sports person do carry glucose bottles with them. Because why do they call glucose gives you instant energy? Because glucose directly gets absorbed into your blood. It doesn't take any time. See, it is the final digested form of carbohydrate. So when you take glucose, or when you consume, or when you drink glucose water, so it directly enters your blood, and it becomes the energy sources for your respiration, in your respiration process, and you get instant energy. That's why glucose gives you instant energy. So okay, put apart. Okay, this is the basic physiology of carbohydrate digestion. So now, going a bit further, what is the chemistry involved in the digestion of these carbohydrates? What are the constituents, and what are the different processes that we can see in the metabolism? You have to call metabolism here, because see, digestion is a broad view. Digestion is also kind of metabolism, but metabolism goes a bit further, explaining the overall changes happening in the molecules, in the molecules at molecular level. So what are the process that we observe in carbohydrate metabolism? So if you look into the process of, like, different steps that occur in the carbohydrate metabolism, the first is so carbohydrate metabolism basically involves three steps. One is glycolysis. Some people call it as glycolysis also. It's depends on the English accent you use. So glycolysis. Next, which results in the end product of pyruvate. The pyruvate next enters into a connecting reaction step, where it is converted into acetyl CoA. Acetyl CoA means coenzyme A. Acetyl coenzyme A. So this acetyl coenzyme A becomes the initiator of tricarboxylic acid cycle, or Krebs cycle, which is the major process in generating our energy with aerobic process. the word by aerobic process I mean here is usage of oxygen or consumption in presence of oxygen. So the first part in the carbohydrate metabolism is glycolysis. So in this glycolysis, what you observe is basically this glycolysis is the universal process in digestion of carbohydrates across the living world. I mean, I'm talking about plants, I'm talking about animals, I'm talking even about microorganisms. You find glycolysis in every organism. So basically, glycolysis occurs in two different ways. I mean, not in two different, yeah, you can call it two different ways. So glycolysis can occur in the presence of oxygen, which is called aerobic glycolysis, and glycolysis can also occur in the absence of oxygen, which is called anaerobic glycolysis. So basically, the end product of aerobic glycolysis is pyruvic acid, and the end product of anaerobic glycolysis is lactic acid. So I'll explain them clearly as I go into details. So the glycolysis is actually initiated from glucose itself. So the final end product of carbohydrate digestion is glucose, which gets absorbed into the blood. So this glucose, majority of glucose immediately after we consume the food enters into the bloodstream or plasma or whatever, plasma or serum, or to put serum. So as the body raises its requirements or finds its requirements for energy, so these glucose molecules get absorbed into cells at respective tissues accordingly based on the needs. So this absorption of um, glucose into cells is also occurs in two different ways. So basically, the two different ways through which glucose gets absorbed into cells are, one is insulin dependent pathway, and the other is excuse me, insulin independent pathway. So in this insulin, let us first look at into the insulin independent pathway. You all know what is insulin, right? It is the hormone released by delta cells from delta cells of pancreas. So it is a glucose regulatory hormone in our body. So it basically converts glucose to glycogen and stores, and whenever needed, this glycogen is broken down into, I mean, converted back to glucose, and it is supplied to supplied to cells wherever there is a need for energy. So this insulin, what in the insulin independent, as our first discussion is um, encompassed to, I mean, as our first discussion is about insulin independent pathway, let us look how these glucose molecules are absorbed into, I mean, or transported into cells. So there are carriers, there are different wide varieties of carriers that we can absorb in each cell of our body. So so these carriers, basically what they do is, so they transport glucose from the external serum to internal cytoplasmic medium, so that glucose can be used for generation of energy. So this is one pathway, and so this majorly occurs in this type of transport. We can observe majorly in hepatocytes, that is liver cells. In brain, we can observe in brain cells, and erythrocytes by I mean are red blood cells. So we can observe this type of glucose transported to cell. This type of what do you call, this is insulin independent pathway of transport of glucose into cells. So these are the three cells where we majorly observe this type of pathway. So in the other pathway, which is insulin dependent pathway, so we find exclusive carriers of glucose. These are called transporters, you can call them transporters. So till date, there are six transporters have been identified, which transport glucose from serum to inside of plasma through insulin molecule. So these are abbreviated as GLUT, and the numbering is given numerically 1 2 3. So we have GLUT1 to GLUT5 and GLUT7. These are the six transporter molecules which have been identified that can transport insulin binded glucose molecule into the cell. So what happened, so you all might have heard this, sometimes cells become resistant to insulin. In these cases, so what basically insulin does is, insulin when interacts with cells, usually increases the number of these transporters in a cell, so that more number of glucose intake occurs into the cells. So when certain cells become resistant to insulin, so you find a decrease in these numbers, hence the glucose is left as such in the blood, and that's why we find So that, and this is majorly in case of diabetes mellitus type 2. So that's why a patient is called diabetic. A lot of, we find a lot of blood levels, a lot of glucose levels in his serum. This is the reason the cells become resistant to glucose, I mean sorry, the cells become resistant to insulin, because of which the transporters are not activated with high number, and which eventually results in low uptake of glucose by the cells. So these are the major, so the two pathways of glucose uptake into cells has also been covered. So the next part is salient features of glycolysis, reactions involved in glycolysis, and other places or other process which are very much related to glycolysis and that helps in various physiological activities of our bodies. So I'll cover these topics in the next videos, and thank you for watching my videos. Don't forget to subscribe here to get all notifications from me. Till then, see you again. Fuzzy Scientist.